7th and 8th grade, welcome to our next Bible video. Now, some of you may be just a little sad that the school year is over, but many of you are just super excited, and that's completely okay. You worked incredibly hard, especially over the past few weeks of online school. So we can enjoy the summer of no school. But you might ask, Mr. Russell, why are we going to spend the last week of our time together talking about these difficult topics? Why discuss these ideas of gender, of marriage, and life, and so on? Well, the answer is very simple. As you go throughout your free summer, rightly enjoying your schoolless life, you will encounter people that have different worldviews. Now, this summer, the majority of those may be subtle worldview differences. But in the months and years to come, you will absolutely encounter people with radically different worldviews. I wouldn't be a good teacher if I didn't give you an encouraging heads up on how to answer these worldview differeces. You will see these differences pop up in a variety of contexts, but in some contexts, they're just more obvious than in others. Imagine this, someone's symptom of heart disease may only show up when they run a marathon. In the same way, so will some of these key worldview differences only clearly show up in certain areas. Now, gender has become one of them. We talked about that in the last video. Marriage has been one for a long time. If someone thinks differently about marriage, that is a symptom that there could be a big worldview difference under the surface. Now, one more thing before we dive into the rest of our video. Why spend a whole video talking about something that you don't have to deal with for the next 10 to 15 years? I don't think that many of you are planning on getting married over the summer. Well, just like an engineer learns how to build a bridge before he actually gets to do it, so as God created context for us to learn key principles, we will get to put into practice when the time is right. For the topic of marriage, that context of learning is ideally your family. And it really is my prayer that I can just give you a short overview and that you then have the relationship with your parents to ask them some questions about these super important topics. Yesterday, we saw that the creation story has some key truth on the topic of gender. You might have guessed it, but the same is true on the topic of marriage. Just as a side note, when secularists or humanists stopped believing in a creation by God, they unavoidably moved to a different understanding of gender, marriage, purpose, and a whole host of things. The creation story gives us clarity that no other worldview can. It's something for us to be incredibly grateful about. The second video for this week, we saw that Adam was alone, and that was not good. He was wired for relationship. He was created imago Dei. Now, I imagine he just couldn't go deep with the panda that lived next door, and so God creates Eve. Now, Moses, the human writer of Genesis, gives us a short summary of God's design. He says the following in Genesis 2, verse 24. He says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." I love how God is the God of clarity. Marriage is very simply this: one man, one woman for a lifetime. Anything outside of that is not in God's design and therefore can't expect God's blessing. Again, marriage, very simply, is one man, one woman for a lifetime. We've built a framework on the foundation of God's Word. We know what marriage is, but within that context, what does God's design practically look like? Well, the Ephesian church was wondering the same thing. Paul talked in chapter 5 of his letter about what love looks like. And then he gets real specific and defines what God-honoring love looks like in a marriage context, according to God's design. He actually quotes the verse in Genesis that we just read, but then in Ephesians 5, down in verse 33, Paul writes the following. Let's just read it together. Chapter 5, verse 33. "However, let each one of you, speak of husbands, love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband." So, love and respect. And although this will look differently in a variety of contexts, it will color the biblical interactions between a husband and a wife. The husband is called to lovingly lead, provide, and care for his wife, and the wife is called to respectfully support that leadership as she nurtures and cares for those that God has placed in her care. Again, this can look a million different ways, but hopefully the principles will stay the same. Husbands and wives are called to love and respect each other in the marriage relationship. I want to address one more thing before we say a virtual goodbye for this content day. We live in a world where sin messes things up. Even the best marriage, where two people are genuinely trying to follow God's design, will struggle at times to do what God says. So, what does the good news of the gospel have to say when the ideal picture of marriage shatters on the rocks of human sin? Well, I need to be honest. Of course, there are consequences to not following God's design. And maybe you felt some of the pain of marriages in your context not going right. Now, I love the story of Jesus with the woman at the well in John chapter 8. Now, this woman, Samaritan woman, was filled with shame because she did not follow God's design for one man, one woman for a lifetime. The truth was, she had disobeyed God on this topic. She probably had 6+ relationships with men. She was way off target when it comes to the worldview section of marriage. But I love what Jesus does. He points her to the hope of himself being living water. This is an amazing metaphor. First, Jesus satisfies. His presence is enough. It's satisfied when down the road you mess up, or when we feel the painful results of living in a sin-filled world. But secondly, his living water also cleans. John makes it a point at the crucifixion story to tell the reader that blood and water flowed from his side at his death. He died so that the effects of our sin, our own sin, or maybe the painful results of other people's sin would be washed away. God's people are called to marriage in God's way, but never without God's pursuing grace.